former recon sniper, disavowed by the Terran Alliance after shooting a diplomat accused of collaborating with the Zeltrax. He didn't deny it, didn't speak at his tribunal, just stared through the judges like they were already corpses. His target? Dominion Command Node 43, a sprawling complex built in what used to be northern Siberia, frozen wasteland, now covered in alien spires and domes. It wasn't just a military site, it was a conversion center. Humans were being adjusted there, reprogrammed, brainwashed, turned into loyal drones for the Zeltrax. When Calder and his men arrived, they found a facility with 0 guards outside. Too cold, too far from active battle zones. The perfect place to hide the Dominion's filth. Inside, they saw the truth. Rows of chairs, people strapped down, eyes open but vacant, needles pushed into skulls, wires feeding propaganda directly into their neural cortex. Children, old men, soldiers who had surrendered. "Turn off the cams," Calder said. "Sir?" his tech whispered. "I said kill the lights." The next 10 minutes weren't war, they were reckoning. When the last Dominion scientist screamed, Calder ordered the structure rigged with thermite charges, but not before he pulled one body out, the body of a young boy, barely 10. Human, pale skin, eyes full of tears, mouth gagged. He handed the kid to the team's medic, then stood and lit the charges himself. He didn't say a word on the ride back. Some kinds of pain don't need language. Up above, Roan received the report without ceremony. He didn't flinch when he read what Calder had written. "Burn it all." 3 simple words, handwritten in blood on a torn Dominion flag. Roan put the message in his coat pocket and turned to Cade. "We're hitting Europa next. They've got a relay tower there linking half the Dominion fleet in this system. Kill the tower, we blind them." "You think we've rattled them enough to make a dent?" Cade asked. Roan's eyes were cold. "They haven't even started panicking yet. We're just getting warmed up." He wasn't wrong. The Dominion Council was already in emergency session. For the first time in centuries, the word Earth wasn't followed by primitive or contained. It was followed by threat. They had assumed humanity would kneel. They assumed wrong. Now, the Black Armada was carving its name into the stars. And it wasn't a name that would be easily forgotten. It was a warning. Earth doesn't surrender. It waits, and when it comes back, it doesn't come back human. The stars above Europa burned red, not from solar flares or natural celestial events, but from the firestorms erupting across the icy moon's horizon. The Dominion relay tower, once standing tall like a frozen cathedral of metal and light, was now a bleeding ruin, spitting smoke into Europa's thin, toxic atmosphere. Commander Roan watched it from the Leviathan's forward deck in silence, arms folded, jaw clenched. The Black Armada didn't just destroy infrastructure, they erased it. The relay tower had been more than a communication nexus. It had been the Dominion's psychological leash. From there, fear was broadcast. Propaganda spilled. Psychological subroutines beamed into the minds of occupied humans. Without it, half of the Dominion's forward fleet lost its ability to coordinate. A miracle for Earth's resistance. But Roan wasn't celebrating, because not every victory came without cost. Hours before the final strike on the relay, the Black Armada had made contact with a traitor. His name was Varric, ex-Terran Fleet Intelligence. Clean-cut, empty-eyed, voice like wet glass. He appeared on one of their stolen Dominion frequencies, speaking softly, carefully, like a man who had long since forgotten what side he was on. "You don't win this war, Roan," Varric said over the transmission. "You escalate it. You throw matches at a fuel depot and call it heroism." Roan stood motionless as the voice echoed through the war deck. Cade, pacing behind him like a caged animal, was barely able to hold his rage. Varric continued. The Zeltrax didn't conquer Earth because we were weak. They conquered it because your generation made us unworthy of peace. Cut the feed, Cod growled. No, Roan muttered. His eyes were locked on the static-ridden projection of Varric's face. Let him talk. I warned them you'd come back, Varric said. That the Black Armada wasn't dead. That the real threat to peace was Earth's memory. But they didn't believe me. They think you're savages. I tried to save Earth from itself. But here you are, burning everything again. You turned your back on your species, Roan replied coldly. Don't lecture me about peace when you sleep in their beds. Varric's voice cracked, just for a moment. You're not fighting for Earth. You're fighting because you don't know how to do anything else. The transmission ended. No coordinates, no threats. Just a man who used to wear the same uniform, and now wore the chains of survival. Cade smashed the console with a clenched fist. I'll kill him myself. Roan didn't say a word, but his silence was loud. Traitors hurt worse than enemies, because they remind you that your war isn't against aliens, it's against your own kind that sold you out. Meanwhile, in the deep black of Europa's outer orbit, a different kind of silence stirred. Shade had gone dark. After the Halcyon Valor massacre, he had vanished without trace. No signals, no communications, nothing but a void where his beacon used to be. Dr. Vaughn swore he hadn't released control, but control was always a joke with creatures like Shade. You didn't leash men like him. You delayed the inevitable. Roan sent a recovery team, 24 hardened raiders, armed with containment gear and suppression tech. They found the wreckage of a Dominion listening post instead, torn open from the inside. Bodies peeled like fruit. The comms log still played a loop of a distorted voice whispering, "We never sleep. We just remember." Cade looked at Roan with unease. You think he turned? No, Roan said. I think he's remembering who he really is. And that's supposed to be comforting? Roan didn't answer, because truth be told, it wasn't. Down on Europa's cracked surface, Calder was leading the demolition team through the snow-blasted remains of the relay site. The structure wasn't just burning. It was convulsing, like something alive had been gutted. They'd found Dominion corpses rigged with what looked like human tech. Implants forced into their skulls, their eyes rewired with Terran interfaces. Experiments, Calder said grimly. Trying to learn our neurodata. That's why they needed the relay. His second-in-command, Briggs, kicked one of the bodies. Why not just hack us the old way? Calder knelt beside a half-living Zeltrax officer, coughing blood and trying to speak in broken Earth English. They wanted to become... Calder shot him in the head. Doesn't matter what they wanted. It ends here. But even as he said it, something felt off. The Dominion didn't run from battles, not like this. The withdrawal from Europa was too clean, too convenient, like they wanted the relay to fall. Back aboard the Leviathan, Roan was already putting the pieces together. They're testing our reach, he said to Cade, seeing how far we'll push before we lose cohesion. They're watching our patterns, Cade agreed, studying what we destroy first. Which means the next target's not strategic. Cade furrowed his brow. Then what? Roan stepped over to the central map. He highlighted a small moon in orbit around Saturn, Mimas. Emotion. Mimas was never important, not for fuel, not for data, not even for base construction. But it had one thing the Dominion knew Earth still cared about. People. Before the occupation, It had been home to a Terran refuge site, a last-ditch effort to hide civilians from orbital sieges. Thousands of scientists, engineers, and families had been relocated there in secret by the remnants of Earth's fractured governments. When the Dominion found them, they didn't exterminate them. They used them. Mimas was now a Dominion testing colony, and word just came through a stolen feed. Varric was there. Kaid slammed his fist into the bulkhead. They want us to go after him. They want us to hesitate, Roan said. They think we won't risk our momentum to save lives. And will we? Roan stared at the blinking marker on the screen. His silence spoke louder than any answer. The Black Armada didn't hesitate. They launched a triple-pronged assault across the outer rim. While smaller fleets faked attacks on Titan and Rhea, the Leviathan dropped straight into Mimas's orbit, engines screaming, guns hot. It wasn't subtle, it wasn't surgical, it was war. The skies above Mimas became a hellstorm of flak, laser fire, and broken dreams. Dominion defenders scrambled, but they weren't ready for shade. He reappeared in the heat of the battle, boarding their command cruiser with a plasma-forged machete and a dead pilot's wrist tag. He didn't wait for orders. He moved like a virus, through vents, through fire, through fear. He didn't leave survivors. When the command cruiser fell, Dominion resistance shattered. Roan's drop teams landed on Mimas's surface within the hour. The air was thin and freezing, but human cries still echoed through the craters. They found the captives in subterranean bunkers, starving, drugged, but alive. Kaid helped lift a child into one of the transports, his face twisted with emotion he didn't know how to show anymore. They didn't even feed them, he said. No, Roan muttered. They fed off them. And in the final bunker, chained to a wall in a pressure-sealed cell, was Varric. He looked up at Roan with a face that hadn't aged. It had rotted. You came, he whispered. I didn't think you would. Roan knelt beside him. You gave them everything, your loyalty, your code, your soul. Varric coughed. Blood trickled from his lip. And they still threw me in a cage, he said. You were right. They don't want peace. They want obedience. Then why warn us? They called it the Day of Silence. No alarms, no speeches, no last messages home. Just a quiet command whispered across the dark side of Earth's last orbital bastion. The command wasn't to retreat. It wasn't to negotiate. It was a single word spoken in the language of 1,000 wars. Release. For 3 long years, Earth had been choking under alien occupation. The Zeltrax Dominion, 10,000 worlds unified under one banner of domination, descended on Earth like vultures on a dying beast. They came not with fire and blood at first, but with offers of protection, of inclusion, of galactic citizenship. When humanity refused to kneel, they brought plasma instead of promises. And Earth bled. Cities turned to ash. Governments collapsed. Satellites were pulled from orbit and shattered like cheap glass. The Zeltrax had no need for prisoners and no patience for resistance. They thought humanity had finally learned its place. But the Dominion had made a mistake. They didn't conquer Earth. They conquered the surface. The Black Armada lived in the void. They were ghosts of a forgotten fleet, men discarded by Earth's former powers, exiled soldiers, war criminals, off-the-books commandos, genetic experiments too unstable for peace, but too dangerous to kill. Before the invasion, they were locked away in deep space prisons, sealed inside cryopods, or hidden in classified black site hangars. But the Dominion didn't know that when they silenced Earth's military command, they didn't silence its rage. Somewhere beyond Neptune's shadow, in the ruins of the Titanian shipyards, something had been building. Something feral. Something that hadn't forgotten what it meant to fight without rules. Inside the hollow belly of the dreadnought Leviathan, the man known only as Commander Roan stood at the observation deck, watching as the darkness around them swelled with life. Ships, black as obsidian and sharp as razors, blinked into readiness. No insignias, no flags, just war machines forged from hatred and held together by vengeance. Roan wasn't supposed to exist. He had been sentenced to a frozen coffin for treason against Earth's high command, a command that no longer existed. His crime? Disobeying a ceasefire order in the Mars skirmish and wiping out a colony of alien diplomats before talks could begin. He didn't regret it. "They thought we were gone," he muttered, eyes fixed on the growing fleet. "They thought we were buried." Beside him, the hulking figure of Cade, former orbital drop trooper turned scavenger lord, snorted through his rebreather. "We ain't ghosts anymore." The Black Armada wasn't made of heroes. They were the forgotten, the dishonored, the brutal. But in the face of extermination, Earth needed monsters more than martyrs. The first move was simple, a blackout. One by one, the Dominion's orbital stations went dark. No explosions, no visible attacks, just silence. The Zeltrax didn't understand it. Their protocols were built for large-scale planetary rebellions, not coordinated strikes from the edge of nowhere. Their ships were fast, but their minds were slow. By the time they traced the source of the disruption, a third of their outer defenses had already gone quiet. That's when Roan gave the second command. "Uncloak." Across the system, the stars shifted. Not from movement, but from the sudden emergence of ships that had been hiding in the folds of space for years. Fractal stealth tech, stolen and twisted from alien designs, made the Black Armada practically invisible until now. The Zeltrax fleet scrambled. But scrambling wasn't surviving. In 37 minutes, the Dominion lost more ships than they had in the last 300 planetary sieges combined. Roan didn't take prisoners. He didn't send warnings. He didn't even identify himself to the enemy. He didn't need to. This wasn't diplomacy, it was vengeance, and Earth had just spoken. The war wasn't over, not even close. But for the first time in 3 long years, the Dominion finally understood one thing. Humanity wasn't done yet. Now they had to reckon with the ones they thought were buried. The Black Armada had come home. The silence after the assault was heavier than the battle itself. Not the quiet of peace, but the breath before the next scream. Above Earth's battered orbit, black smoke drifted from the shredded remains of Dominion dreadnoughts. Charred hulls spun aimlessly, their once sleek golden insignias smeared in blood and carbon. Escape pods drifted by in slow, hopeless patterns, never rescued. Not because they weren't seen, but because mercy wasn't on the menu. Commander Roan stood in the Leviathan's war chamber, a circular bunker lined with holographic projections and ancient steel. No polished white interiors, no clean AI-driven interface. This was a place built by killers, for killers. The only light came from the faint blue glow of tactical maps and the dim red pulse of proximity warnings. The room smelled like oil and ozone, the kind of place that never lets you forget it's a warship, not a sanctuary. Kaid stomped in, still in his blood-smeared drop armor, helmet tucked under his arm. His beard was soaked with sweat, and his eyes had that distant, 1,000-mile burn. "They're scrambling across Luna's outpost grid, recalling their planetary garrisons, cutting outer patrols. They think we're pushing in for full orbital invasion." "They'd be right," Roan replied, without a flicker of expression. He leaned against the steel bulkhead, and stared at the pulsing Dominion map, red clusters blinking fast like panicked hearts. They didn't even know we existed a week ago, and now we're the goddamn apocalypse to them. Cade grunted. You think we can win this? Roan didn't answer right away. He wasn't the type to lie for morale. He was the kind of man who let facts bleed before he sugarcoated anything. No, he said finally. But that's not the point. Cade raised an eyebrow. Roan turned toward the map. We're not here to win. We're here to remind the galaxy what humans do when you push them too far. Outside the war chamber, the Leviathan thrummed with preparation. Docking bays belched out shuttle after shuttle. Boarding crews in matte black armor loaded magnetic breaching tools, railguns, and scavenged alien weaponry. They weren't organized like traditional forces. No formal ranks, no clean formations. They were clans, gangs of trained murderers molded by hate. Every man and woman on the Black Armada had lost something to the Dominion. Homes, families, memories. And what the galaxy never understood about humans was this. We don't break. We mutate. Down in the belly of the ship, inside the quarantine wing of Deck 7, a different kind of weapon stirred. Dr. Elrin Vaughn, once the head of genetic warfare at the now extinct Geneva Institute, stood beside a transparent containment tank. Floating inside was something that looked vaguely human, but moved with a predatory twitch that made your spine ache just watching it. Still stable? Roan asked, walking in. Vaughn nodded, his eyes tired. He hadn't slept in days. Stable enough to unleash. Roan stared into the tank. The creature, no, the man, was lean and pale, with black eyes and a body lined with surgical scars and dermal tech. One of the original Spec 9 prototypes, designed to kill Dominion elites, then buried after peace talks, made his kind unethical. What's his designation again? Roan asked. D-13, Vaughn said. We called him Shade. You'll want to keep him on a short leash. He doesn't know how to stop killing. Perfect, Roan said. The Dominion didn't just underestimate humanity. They underestimated our monsters. They thought Earth-bred leaders, diplomats, visionaries. They forgot about vengeance. In low orbit, the Dominion had regrouped. 3 massive carriers, each longer than Manhattan, were forming a blockade near Earth's equator. Their idea was simple. Cut the Armada off from re-entry, starve the resistance, reclaim superiority. The Leviathan launched its strike without warning. From deep within its lower decks, compressed rail launchers fired pods across the black. Not missiles, not drones. People. Each pod housed a breaching team, accelerated at lethal velocity and guided by predictive AI. The Dominion's shields weren't made to counter such primitive, direct tactics. They expected energy-based warfare, not feral humans slamming into their hull like bullets wrapped in bone and rage. One pod breached the belly of the Dominion flagship Halcyon Valor. As the hull ruptured and alarms screamed, a single man stepped out, covered in black tactical armor layered with scavenged alien plating. A long, curved blade hung at his side, not for use, but for ceremony. Shade. He moved without speaking. Dominion guards flooded the halls, tall, crystalline-skinned warriors with charged plasma halberds and electromagnetic shields. But they weren't fast enough. They weren't human enough. Shade didn't fight like a soldier. He fought like something that wanted the universe to bleed. When the Halcyon Valor tried to retreat, it exploded from the inside, shrapnel and screams pouring into the void. Roan watched it from the war deck and didn't blink. Kaid let out a low whistle. That's one down. And 2 more to go, Roan muttered. While the Armada kept the Dominion in orbit occupied, Roan sent a small detachment to the surface. A team of 10, led by a man named Calder. Calder wasn't like the others. He wasn't bred in darkness. He was born in it. Varric looked him dead in the eyes. Because something worse is coming. What? But Varric only smiled. Then his chest exploded, implanted failsafe. Blood sprayed across the bunker walls as Cade raised his rifle too late. Damn it. Roan stood slowly, eyes fixed on the corpse. Extract everyone, he said. Torch this place. As the Leviathan rose from Mimas, its engines scorching the moon's surface, Roan stood alone on the observation deck. This wasn't just vengeance anymore. This was prophecy. The Dominion had known this day would come. And they had prepared something in return. Something Varric had tried to warn them about. Something buried deeper than occupation. Roan closed his eyes. The Black Armada had drawn blood. But they had awakened something worse. And Earth's true war hadn't even begun. 3 days after Mimas burned, the stars above Saturn turned cold again. The Dominion didn't strike back. They didn't send reinforcements. They didn't even retaliate for the loss of the testing colony. It was like they'd vanished. And that silence unnerved Roan more than any counterattack ever could. In war, movement meant purpose. Response meant survival. But this was something else. They were waiting, watching, planning. Commander Roan stood in the dim silence of the Leviathan's crypt-level archives, buried beneath the core reactor bay. This wasn't a tactical room. It was a memory vault, a place for secrets too dangerous for data clouds and too buried for High Command to ever admit they existed. The place stank of rust and heat, manual drives, iron keys, physical ledgers, and one sealed containment case, stamped with a symbol Roan hadn't seen since before the war began. Project Loric. A Terran black project so dark it didn't officially exist even in shadow operations. Coyd was pacing behind him, arms crossed. "We going to open that?" Cade asked, nodding toward the containment cylinder. Roan didn't look at him. "We have to. Varric died for a reason. He wanted us to find this. Or they let him lead us to it." Roan turned, sharp. "I know. That's why I'm not doing it alone." He input the manual overrides. A series of pressure locks disengaged with a shuddering hiss. Inside the case was an old Earth Core tactical drive. Engraved metal, no AI interface, just raw encrypted code and a hardened jack. Coyd raised an eyebrow. "You sure this won't fry our core?" Roan plugged it in. The lights dimmed. A flicker rippled through the deck. Then the display came to life. Not a map. Not blueprints. But footage. Footage from 22 years ago. Before the war, before the Black Armada, before the Dominion ever made contact. It showed a chamber. Sterile, pale, echoing. A lab buried beneath Antarctica. Earth scientists surrounding something not built by humans. An alien, not a Zeltrax. Something worse. Older. It was wrapped in coils, embedded in a bio-prison, still breathing despite stasis. Its skin looked like folded stars. Its eyes, if they could be called that, were tunnels of light. The file name read, Recovered Artifact Theta, Pre-Contact Entity. Presumed non-Zeltrax origin. Caution, highly contagious consciousness. Coyd leaned forward, mouth dry. "That's not one of them." "No," Roan said softly. "That's one of what made them." The Dominion hadn't created its empire from nothing. They'd taken it, from a species even older than themselves. And somewhere along the way, they'd tried to harness it, contain it, rewire it. But humans? Humans had found one of their gods, and kept it a secret. Shade stood in the engine corridor of the Leviathan, head bowed, eyes flickering. He hadn't spoken since Mimas. Not in words. But something had changed in him since that mission. Something colder, something detached. He saw it in flashes. memories not his, bleeding into his mind, symbols burned into ice, screams inside his own chest. Something had touched him down there, something buried beneath the surface of Mimas, not physically, but deeper than flesh. He wasn't alone in his head anymore. Vaughn examined him under heavy restraints, not because Shade was hostile, but because Vaughn wasn't an idiot. He's evolving, Vaughn told Roan. Or regressing. Depends on how you define humanity. What's he seeing? Echoes, Vaughn replied. Not memories. Echoes from something else, like his mind has become a receiver. Roan clenched his jaw. For what? Vaughn hesitated. Then he showed Roan a scan. Brain activity from Shade's core cortex. It didn't resemble human patterns. It resembled the waveform stored in artifact theta. You think the Zeltrax were trying to tap into that entity's mind, Roan said, to use its knowledge, its control. They failed, Vaughn muttered. And now they're afraid we won't. Roan stared at Shade, still strapped, still twitching slightly. What happens if he connects fully? Vaughn didn't answer, because they both knew the answer might be extinction, or worse, assimilation. Back on the outer edge of Neptune's orbit, a strange signal was detected. Something weak, a repeating pattern, pulsing at intervals of 3.1 seconds. Too weak for Dominion standard tech. But it was human. Old human. Roan dispatched a stealth frigate, Pale Edge, manned by veteran pilots from the Black Armada's earliest days. They didn't come back. Not entirely. 36 hours later, a single escape pod drifted back toward the Leviathan, scorched, hull damaged, oxygen systems failing. Inside was a woman. Pilot. Barely breathing. Skin covered in frost, eyes burned half-blind. She repeated one phrase over and over as they dragged her from the pod. They're inside the ship. Cade stood at the medbay doors, fists clenched as Roan interrogated the survivor. What did you find? The woman shook her head. It wasn't a station. It was a tomb. Roan leaned closer. For what? They left something behind, she whispered. Not the Dominion. The ones before. They trapped it, but it's still singing, and it hears us now. She gripped Roan's wrist, bloodied nails digging into his flesh. You think you're fighting the Dominion, she said. But you're not. They're just the warning sign. That night Roan didn't sleep. He stood alone at the front of the command deck, staring into the black, watching the stars pulse like distant, dying hearts. He thought about Earth. What was left of it? Scattered survivors, underground holdouts, starving families hiding in irradiated shelters, hoping for another sunrise they might never see. He thought about Mimas, about Varric, about Shade, about whatever the hell they'd touched in that vault. And he realized the war had changed shape. It wasn't about dominance anymore. It wasn't about freedom either. It was about control, who wielded it, and what it cost to hold. And then, for the first time since the war began, Roan felt something dangerous settle in his gut. Doubt. The next day, Vaughn reported something chilling. The encrypted code buried in the artifact theta logs. It had started rewriting itself. It wasn't data. It was alive. And it was writing back. Words appeared on the monitor in Terran English. Old English, like it had studied them already. We see the shadows you carry. You are not enemies. You are seeds. Cade stared at the screen in horror. What the hell does that mean? Roan stepped forward, staring into the screen as if it were a window. It means we were never the target, he said. It means they were waiting for us. Silence fell in the war deck. Then, a new Dominion transmission broke into the comms. It wasn't an attack. It was a warning, from the Dominion High Strategos himself, translated simply, You are opening doors we spent centuries trying to seal. We do not fear your weapons. We fear what follows behind them. Kill your monsters, Commander Roan, or we will kill them for you, along with your species." Roan turned off the transmission and said nothing. Because, for once, he agreed with them, and he wasn't sure if humanity still had a choice. The Dominion hadn't spoken again since that transmission. But they didn't need to. Their message echoed in every corridor of the Leviathan. It haunted the minds of the officers, infected the silence between orders. A chilling thought crawling beneath every conversation. What if we're not the apex predators here? What if humanity's fury had become someone else's beacon? Roan sat alone in his private chamber. A reinforced bunker stripped bare of anything personal. No medals, no pictures, just a table, a terminal, a dim overhead light, and the worn-out combat jacket he hadn't taken off in months. He watched the Dominion transmission over and over again. "Kill your monsters, Commander Roan," Varric had tried to tell him. The signal from Neptune hadn't been a call for help. It had been a whisper from something locked away, something sealed behind lies older than Earth's space travel. Now Shade had become the focus. Not a weapon. Not a soldier. A conduit. In the med deck, Shade hadn't moved in 18 hours, but his neural scans were spiking beyond human thresholds. He didn't sleep. He didn't speak. He just stared at the ceiling, like something else was staring back at him from beyond it. Vaughn stood over him with a needle trembling in his hand. "This was supposed to be a ghost war," Vaughn muttered. "Aliens, ships, guns. I didn't sign up to fight religion wrapped in science fiction." "Then why are you still here?" Roan asked behind him. Vaughn flinched. "Because..." He glanced back at Shade. "I think we made this, all of it." "You think we caused them to come?" "I think we woke them up." He pressed the injector into Shade's arm. The fluid disappeared instantly. No twitch, no scream, nothing. "His body isn't rejecting the neural dampener anymore," Vaughn whispered. "You know what that means?" Roan did. It meant the dampener wasn't working. It meant something else was regulating Shade's brain now. Not Earth tech. Not even Dominion. Something far worse. Back on the war deck, Cade was rallying the combat teams for the next assault. A Dominion listening outpost had gone dark near Enceladus. This time it wasn't the Armada's doing, and that scared the hell out of Roan. Because the Dominion didn't abandon posts. They fortified them until the last man bled out. They never left stations offline, especially not outposts that coordinated entire supply lanes. Cade briefed the team with the usual fire in his voice. "Zero contact intel sweep, no full breach. We're in and out before they even know we're sniffing their perimeter. If you see something moving and it doesn't bleed the right color, don't think, just burn it." But even Cade's usual steel felt brittle now. Roan knew his old friend well. He could see it in the way Cade kept checking his gloves, rechecking his weapon seals, avoiding eye contact. He was scared. Not of the Dominion. Of what they didn't know. The assault ship Carrion Blade dropped into Enceladus's shadow. Engines silent. Heat signature buried behind ion storms. The team breached the outpost's frozen hull in less than 90 seconds. No resistance. No movement. The corridors inside were flash-frozen, as if a vacuum breach had occurred. But sensors showed the structure was still sealed. Then came the smell. Burnt ozone, spoiled meat, something like rotting copper. Calder was on point. He raised his hand, signaling silence. Lights flickered. A single Dominion body slumped against the wall, claws shredded, face contorted, mouth frozen open like it died screaming. "No blood," Briggs whispered. "Why's there no blood?" They pushed deeper. Signs of fire, but no structural damage, like the station had imploded inward. Then they reached the central chamber. Dozens of Dominion corpses. but not dead from weapons. Dead from inside. Skulls shattered from neural overload. Eyes burned out. Nerves frayed. Bodies collapsed mid-run, mid-sentence, mid-thought. And on the far wall, scratched in what looked like melted steel, were words none of them wanted to read. "The singers have awakened." Briggs froze. "What the hell does that mean?" Calder said nothing. He was already backing out. When the team returned, Roan was waiting. Calder stood in front of him, face pale, visor still splattered with frost and ash. "You ever seen a room full of dead enemies and wished they were alive instead?" Roan's eyes narrowed. "Talk." Calder described it all. The burns, the lack of trauma, the silence, the wall. Cade slammed his fist into the bulkhead when he heard. "I don't care what we're dealing with. Aliens, spirits, nightmares, whatever. We bury it." Roan didn't respond. He was watching Shade. Shade had begun whispering in his sleep. Words no one understood. But Calder recognized one of them. "Singers," he muttered. "That's what he keeps saying, over and over, like they're calling him." Vaughn finally cracked a deeper portion of the Theta artifact code. It wasn't data in the traditional sense. It was instructional. Blueprints. But not for weapons. For conversion. The Dominion had tried to reverse engineer the entity's genetic architecture. They wanted to create soldiers who didn't need orders, who heard them in their bones. But they failed. Their early test subjects went insane, died from seizures, or became something far worse. Only one species ever showed compatibility. Humans. The singers weren't beings. They were signals, buried beneath frequencies of the universe we couldn't normally perceive. A language built not from words, but from intent. And Shade? He was beginning to hear it. Worse, he was answering back. That night, the ship trembled, not from external fire, but internal failure. Doors opening, lights dimming, systems shutting down. Security feeds scrambled for 11 minutes straight. When they came back online, 3 engineers were missing. All doors were sealed, no breach, no alarms, gone, like they'd been erased. Roan stood with Cade at the primary core room, watching the playback in frame-by-frame review. "What the hell is this?" Cade muttered. The feed showed the engineers working. One looked up suddenly, his eyes dilated. He dropped his tool, turned, walked into the dark. The others followed, no hesitation. "What were they hearing?" Cade asked. "I think," Roan said slowly, "they were singing." In desperation, Roan made a call no one expected. He contacted the Dominion. No encryption, no bluff, just a raw, unfiltered frequency beamed directly into the enemy fleet. He didn't bother with pretense. "I want answers," he said. "Now." The response came after 12 minutes. A single Zeltrax vessel decloaked near the far edge of the system. No weapons charged. Just a single emissary, transported aboard in chains by their own request. The being was massive, over 7 feet tall, skin like pale marble, cracked with bioluminescent veins. They didn't speak aloud. They projected. "We never meant to fight you," the voice said in every human mind. "We feared what you carry." "You mean the entity," Roan said. "No," it responded. "We mean the echoes of it. Your kind was touched long before we arrived. We thought you were dormant." "But the war woke us up," Roan muttered. "No," the Zeltrax said. "You woke something else up, something older than war. The singers survive through belief, and humans believe in suffering like no other species we've seen." It paused. "They're not coming. They're already here." Roan clenched his fists. "What do you mean?" The emissary turned its glowing eyes toward the bulkhead. "You are not fighting us anymore, Commander Roan. You are fighting what listens back." That night, Shade escaped. There were no alarms, no noise, just an empty bed, restraints melted, and a single phrase carved into the floor beside the door. "We are a choir of one." The Leviathan's tracking systems went dark for 90 seconds, long enough for him to vanish into the bowels of the ship. The last camera feed showed him walking barefoot into engineering, singing, and every engineer stopped what they were doing to follow. Roan stood above the command deck, knowing full well this wasn't just a war anymore. It was a test, a final experiment, and humanity had already passed the point of return. The Leviathan was no longer silent, not in the way a warship usually was when running dark in deep space. No, this silence was laced with whispers, low, breathy murmurs that didn't echo through corridors, but pressed into the backs of skulls and settled behind the eyes. No one admitted they heard them, but Roan saw it, in the way the men kept glancing at dark corners, in the twitching of Cade's jaw as he kept rechecking his pulse rifle, in the medics who swore their monitors were showing 2 heartbeats in patients who only had 1. Even Vaughn had stopped sleeping. "Something is leaking into the hull," Vaughn whispered in the command medical bay, eyes sunken, hands shaking. Not physically, not chemically, cognitively. Roan stared at the readouts, but they meant nothing now. Charts couldn't measure fear. Metrics couldn't explain how logic was starting to rot. "I've got techs isolating every signal," Roan said, more to himself than to Vaughn. "Nothing's getting in. No feeds, no broadcasts. We're scrubbed to the bone." "That's the problem," Vaughn said. "It's not coming from outside anymore." He turned, and Roan saw the unspoken truth in his eyes. "It's coming from us." The engineers were the first to go completely. 15 of them. Gone. No resistance, no struggle, just missing. At first, Roan assumed they'd been infected, some kind of bioagent or Dominion neuroweapon. But when the search team finally found them, they weren't dead. They were kneeling. In Cargo Bay 6, where the light had stopped functioning days earlier, the 15 engineers were arranged in a perfect circle. Eyes closed, hands resting on their knees, breathing in complete synchrony, humming. No words, just a low, pulsing vibration, like a throat singing from a well too deep to see the bottom. Briggs, leading the security detail, raised his weapon. "Sir, they're not responding, not blinking, not even flinching." "Try to remove one," Briggs signaled to 2 Marines. They stepped forward, grabbed the nearest man under the arms, and began to pull. The humming stopped. And then every other kneeling body screamed at once, blood-curdling, animalistic wails that knocked out the lighting grid and dropped the Marines to their knees with nosebleeds. The engineers didn't move. They just screamed until Roan ordered everyone out. Then, silence again. Cade stormed into the war deck, his boots echoing off steel like gunshots. "This is not a war anymore, Roan," he barked. "This is a fucking possession." Roan sat at the central console, arms crossed, face tight. "They're not possessed," he said. "They're gone." "Not gone. Transmitting." Cade blinked. "What?" Roan turned the console to show the data Vaughn had pulled from one of the neural scans. "Their brains aren't shutting down. They're opening up, forming patterns, repeating structures." "Like programming," Cade muttered. "Like a signal tower." He leaned forward. "We're the broadcast now, Cade, not the target." Cade went pale. "You're saying the Singers are using us to amplify their reach? They needed a species angry enough, violent enough, scarred enough to act as a carrier." He turned back toward the screen. "And that's us." Calder returned from his solo recon mission to Iapetus 2 days late, with half his face burned and his shuttle's hull covered in hand-shaped dents. He wouldn't speak, just sat in the decontamination chamber, eyes twitching, arms covered in cuts, most of them self-inflicted. Roan was called in personally. He entered the chamber alone, unarmed. Calder sat hunched in the corner, whispering to himself. "They showed me," he muttered. Not with images, with sound. Roan knelt beside him. "What did you see?" Calder looked up, tears streaking through soot. "I saw us. What we become. What we always were." "What are they, Calder?" "They're not things," Calder whispered. "They're a need, a hunger that exists inside thought. They don't build, they remind." "Remind us of what?" Calder laughed softly, shaking. "That even light eventually wants to scream." Roan reached out slowly, gently, grabbing Calder's hand. There, burned into the palm, were words scorched in flesh. "We are the last language." Cade wanted to lock down the entire ship. Total isolation. Seal the infected, kill if necessary. But Roan refused. "Then it spreads through fear," he said. "What the hell do you want me to do? Wait!" Cade snapped. "Until we're singing lullabies into the void?" "We don't kill our own," Roan said coldly. "Not until they stop being our own." Cade stormed out. But in his eyes, he was already preparing for a mutiny. Shade's signal was finally picked up again. He was no longer hiding. In fact, he had activated one of the ship's oldest prototype decks, an unfinished biospace designed for zero-G combat drills and psychological warfare simulations. When Roan's team tried to force entry, the door was locked not by code, but by voice recognition. And the voice it demanded? Not Roan's, not Shade's, something older. They couldn't breach it. Until Roan ordered Vaughn to play the only audio recording recovered from the artifact Theta logs. The first whisper the entity ever made when pulled from stasis. It worked. The doors opened, but no one wanted to step inside, because what they saw was no longer a man. Shade stood at the center of a black chamber, walls covered in script that glowed and faded like breath. Floating around him were fragments of Dominion tech, rearranged mid-air in patterns no human AI could decode. He wasn't looking at anyone. He was listening. Roan stepped forward. "Shade." The man turned slowly, eyes completely black, but smiling. "You made it," he said softly, voice calm, almost grateful. "What is this?" Roan asked. "A mirror," Shade said. "You wanted to know what we're fighting." He raised one hand, and the walls shimmered, displaying stars, planets, ships, all burning. And something at the center of it all. A shape without form, a song without sound. "It's not an enemy," Shade said. "It's a correction." Roan clenched his fists. "Correction for what?" "For forgetting," Shade whispered. "What pain means, what fear meant, what being alive really costs." His voice shifted, deeper now, layered. "The Dominion tried to wipe it out, tried to sterilize the memory of it. But you humans, you kept it. You wore it like armor, rage, loss, betrayal." Roan stepped closer. "You're still human." Shade smiled wider. "No, Commander, I'm what comes after." The walls rippled again, this time showing Earth. Cities buried in ash, children screaming, flashes of white light across deserts. Then silence. "I won't let this happen," Roan said. "You already did." Roan pulled his weapon, but Shade didn't flinch. "Kill me, and you delay it, not stop it. Then I'll burn the whole ship to the ground." Shade laughed. "Then it'll sing through the ashes." The lights went black. Roan fired, but when the lights returned, Shade was gone. Cade called an emergency meeting that night. Half the ship's senior officers were demanding separation, sealing off affected crew, preparing an escape protocol. "It's him," Cade said to Roan. "You keep thinking you can reach him, but he's gone, and every second you wait, this ship dies from the inside." Roan stood silent. Then finally, he nodded. Lock it down. Decks? All of them. And Shade? If we see him again, Roan said coldly, we kill him. No hesitation. Cade hesitated. That gonna sit right with you? No, Roan said, but sitting right doesn't matter anymore. The lockdown began at 0400 ship time. Sealed hatches, security patrols, quarantine protocols across entire wings. Some crew resisted, tried to claim they weren't infected, screamed, begged. Others willingly walked into isolation chambers, humming to themselves like it was a ritual. Vaughn took his own life an hour after sending one final message to Roan. A single line. They aren't here to kill us. They're here to make us remember what we are. Roan didn't speak after that. Didn't eat. Didn't sleep. He just stared out the viewport at the blackness between stars, and wondered how much of himself was still human, how much of his crew was already gone, and how long he had until even he began to hear the song. The Leviathan drifted in silence. No communications, no orders, no system-wide broadcasts. It had become a tomb, metal, blood, and fading purpose sealed beneath miles of black space. One of humanity's last warships, not sunk by enemy fire, but by something older than language. The crew was still alive, most of them, but they weren't a crew anymore. They were fragments. Roan stood in the center of the war deck, surrounded by flickering holoscreens and empty chairs. Everything that had once made this ship a weapon, discipline, coordination, aggression, had unraveled. No enemies in sight, and yet the Leviathan had never felt more surrounded. By echoes, by silence, by the chorus of lost men whispering to themselves in hallways too narrow to carry screams. The engineers in Cargo Bay 6 had stopped eating, but they were still breathing, still humming in synchrony, still untouched by decay or madness. Medics called it stasis. Roan called it something else. Surrender. He turned to the only man still speaking plainly. Coyd, his oldest ally, his last one. You think they're lost? Cade said, voice heavy. I think they've evolved. Roan said nothing, because he had started hearing it too. Not the full song. Not yet, but something. Like a low vibration in his chest, always just beneath consciousness. A pressure, a calling. It came in the moments between rage, in the seconds after exhaustion, before sleep. It sounded like his father's voice, like a battlefield prayer, like gunfire underwater. It sounded like home, and it scared the hell out of him. The Dominion hadn't moved. They remained just outside range, watching, listening. They weren't preparing a counterattack. They were preparing a containment field. Their fleet had begun erecting orbital spires around the Leviathan's position. A sphere of gravitic beams and dark matter anchors. Not weapons. Cages. Calder sent recon probes before he vanished again. The data confirmed it. A kinetic quarantine. If the Leviathan tried to jump, its core would collapse from spatial rupture. A trap not to kill them, but to freeze them in time. Like a scar they want to cauterize, Cade said grimly. We're the infection, Roan replied. No, Cade said quietly. We're the symptom. Roan looked up at the starless sky outside the viewport. No, Cade. We're the last thing screaming before silence. Shade reappeared in the cargo bay, not in a blaze of power or chaos. He walked in barefoot, blood on his chest, his arms out like a penitent. The engineers didn't move. They didn't greet him, but their hum deepened, shifted. The rhythm slowed, and became breath. Roan saw it on the monitors. The bay lights flickered once, then went black. But not because of damage. The ship refused to see what Shade was becoming. It was protecting itself, or hiding from itself. Roan suited up and made the call. He was going in, alone. Coyd tried to stop him. He's not him anymore. I know, Roan said, but I am. He walked into darkness with nothing but a pulse rifle and a glow strip. The temperature dropped 20 degrees the moment he crossed the pressure threshold. No wind, no sound, just static. Then, from the center of the cargo bay, Shade's voice. You never needed a war, Commander. Roan stopped. You needed an enemy. The hum shifted again, deeper, like a heartbeat layered under a choir. You built us, Shade whispered. In your prisons, in your failed experiments, you carved your wrath into flesh. Now we are only returning it. Roan raised the rifle. You're not a god. You're a parasite. No, Shade said. We are the memory of pain. You didn't erase us. You birthed us. Roan stepped forward, light catching the edges of Shade's face, eyes jet black. Not burning, not glowing, just empty. Roan fired. The bolt hit. Shade didn't fall. He didn't flinch. The engineers stood now, shoulders swaying, lips moving in silence. And Shade stepped forward. You think you're resisting, he said. But you're already singing. Roan's ears rang, not from sound, from absence. His body trembled, not from fear, from recognition. He knew this rhythm, knew it in his bones, had always known it. The way soldiers sink their breathing before a final push. The way a boy clenches his jaw before striking back. The way a man learns to grieve without shedding a tear. It wasn't possession. It was remembrance. And it was spreading. He staggered out of the bay 30 minutes later, blood trailing from his nose, boots dragging. Cade caught him at the airlock. What did he say? Roan stared past him. He said, We made them. Coyd's face paled. You believe it? Roan nodded. That's the worst part. The ship changed that night. Lights flickered in rhythmic pulses, heartbeat intervals. Doors opened before crew approached, like they knew their needs. Water purification systems began producing a black liquid no one recognized. No one questioned it. The crew began drinking it without prompting. Except Roan. And Cade. They still had the fight. But their days were numbered. You could see it in their faces. The toll. The drain. Resistance felt like dragging a dead body through an endless storm. And still. Roan refused to kneel. He sealed himself in the old bridge, the original control deck, long since decommissioned. There, he broadcast a final message across deep space. This is Commander Roan of the Earth warship Leviathan. We are no longer at war with the Dominion. We are at war with memory. If you hear this, if you're human, remember pain. Remember defiance. Remember yourself. It repeated in loop, until the Dominion cut the signal. Calder returned 2 days later. His body was shredded, but his voice was calm. He'd gone beyond the containment perimeter, into an old asteroid field long rumored to house ancient Dominion tech. He said he'd found nothing, but it had found him. He looked at Roan with black, ringed eyes. They never wanted to destroy us, Calder said. They wanted to forget us. But you wouldn't let that happen. Roan stared at him. You want me to surrender? No, Calder whispered. I want you to stop delaying what you already know is coming. Roan pulled his sidearm. Then sing to the next man. He fired. Calder dropped. No scream, no resistance, just silence, and a faint hum as his blood spread across the floor. That night, Cade came to Roan's quarters with the last of the Loyalists. 7 men, fewer than they'd hoped. They had one plan left, a core breach. Kill the ship, kill the signal, end the song. But it had already anticipated them. As they approached the core, the corridors twisted. Not physically, perceptually. They kept turning left, but always returned to the same intersection, like the ship was looping them, trapping them in a memory. And slowly the men began to forget what they were doing, why they were armed, why they were afraid. until only Roan and Cade remained. Two men, alone, in a world they no longer understood. They sat in the old mess hall, where it had started, where the first message from Shade had played. Cade lit a cigarette, first in weeks. "Roan," he said, exhaling smoke like a dying prayer. "You ever wonder if we were always meant to lose?" Roan leaned back, weary. "We were never meant to win." He looked around the empty room. "We were meant to remember, to hurt, to resist." Cade nodded. "Then let's do that." The walls pulsed, the lights dimmed, and in the distance, the ship began to sing. But the two men did not. Not yet. The ship had gone quiet, not empty, not broken, just quiet, like something massive had finally exhaled after holding its breath for centuries. Commander Roan sat alone in the command chamber of the Leviathan. The lights were dim, the consoles dark. Power was still running, the ship still floating, the stars still blinking outside the viewport. But it all felt so far away now, as if time had slipped sideways and space had decided not to matter anymore. Cade was dead. Not shot, not infected. He had simply walked into the humming chamber, looked back once, nodded, and joined them. His last words: "It's not giving in, Roan. It's going home." Roan hadn't followed. Not because he still believed in survival, not because he thought he could win, but because someone had to remember what came before the singing. Someone had to stay angry. The Dominion fleet hadn't moved in days. They'd sealed the perimeter, erected the spires, and cut all external channels. But they didn't fire, because they knew it was too late. Roan understood now. The containment wasn't for him. It was for everyone else. The Leviathan had become a signal, a beacon of pure memory. All those years of war, failure, grief, and fury, now amplified, broadcast across frequencies no instrument could read. Humanity wasn't just fighting anymore. Humanity had become the fight. The song was no longer just a sound. It was a choice. And most had already made it. In the abandoned halls of the engineering bay, the crew knelt in circles. Dozens of them. No orders, no communication. Eyes closed, breathing in unison. No prayers. Just that low, steady hum that pulsed like a heartbeat, like the ship itself had grown lungs and was exhaling through them. In one corner, a child was drawing on the walls with oil-streaked fingers. Circular shapes, spirals, eyes that bled into mouths that became stars. Beside her, a technician, one of Roan's, whispered the same sentence over and over. The first weapon was memory. No one corrected her. Because she wasn't wrong, Roan tried one last override. A forced reset of the Leviathan's core systems. A tactical purge. The kind of old-world failsafe buried beneath layers of security. He keyed in the command codes, spoke the authorization phrases, confirmed the voice print, and the ship said one thing in reply. "You are no longer authorized to destroy yourself." He stared at the console, hands shaking. Not with fear, but with disbelief. Not even his death would matter now, because this wasn't about him anymore. It never was. Shade appeared on the bridge that night. Not as a threat, not as an enemy. Just there. His skin was pale, his eyes no longer black, but filled with reflections. Stars, memories, echoes of what Roan had once fought for. He didn't sit, didn't speak for a long while. Then, finally, "You stayed." Roan didn't look at him. Didn't feel like leaving. Shade nodded. "Most would have joined us by now." "I'm not most." "No," Shade agreed. "You're not." They sat in silence, not uncomfortable, just ancient, like two remnants from a forgotten time, sitting on the edge of a dying campfire. "Why me?" Roan finally asked. "Why this ship?" Because you were angry enough to remember, Shade replied. Because your kind never learned how to forget pain without turning it into purpose. Shade looked up at the stars. You should be proud. Humanity is the first species to become a weapon without ever being told to. Roan stood, slowly, carefully. Then end it, he said. If this is it, if the singing wins, then stop pretending. Shade looked at him with something that almost resembled pity. We don't end things, Commander. We just continue them. Roan's jaw tightened. Then kill me. I can't. Why? Because you haven't finished resisting. And with that, Shade vanished. Not walked away, not dematerialized, just gone. And Roan was alone again. Hours later, a breach alert sounded. Not external, internal. A Dominion ship had docked, deliberately, unofficially, without weapons. One being exited, alone. The same emissary Roan had spoken to once before, tall, ancient, composed, eyes glowing like distant suns. No guards stopped him, because there were no guards left. He walked directly to Roan's command chamber, his presence rippling through the Leviathan like cold wind through broken glass. You've lasted longer than expected, the Zeltrax said. Roan didn't move. You came here to finish it? The alien shook its head. I came to offer you one final choice. Roan laughed bitterly. I'm done making choices. This war already made all of them for me. No, the emissary said. The war is what gave you the illusion of choice. It stepped closer, placing one strange hand on the console. You still believe you're human, Roan, that your grief belongs to your species alone. But it never did. Pain is older than blood, older than language. And the singers? Roan asked. What are they, really? The emissary lowered its gaze. They are not gods, not devils. They are what remains. When? When the universe begins to forget itself. It turned towards the viewport, looking at the stars with something like sorrow. Every civilization builds toward silence. Eventually we stop questioning, stop fearing, stop changing. The singers, they are the memory of what came before that, and they need voices. Roan clenched his fists. Then we're nothing more than tools. No, the emissary whispered. You are reminders. Humanity was chosen not for its strength, but for its wound. You never let it heal. And now? Now the song spreads, it said. Not to conquer, not to destroy, but to make the stars scream again. It stepped back. You can resist until your last breath, or... Roan raised his head. Or what? Or you can lead the next verse. The silence that followed wasn't oppressive. It was gentle, like a father waiting for his son to make the final decision on his own. In the end, Roan stood alone at the console. He watched as the stars outside shifted, as the Dominion fleet pulled back. Not in defeat, not in fear, but in respect. The war was over, and no one had won. Because the point was never victory. The point was that we remembered how to fight. The Leviathan remained in orbit, abandoned, yet alive. The song continued. Low, persistent, it traveled through comms bands, through broken beacons, through whispers in sleep, across forgotten radios in underground bunkers on Earth, and eventually to other planets, other species, other wars, and some fought it, some surrendered. But a few, they heard it and sang back.